Thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. We wanted to provide you with an overview of the ESG and ESGCV fiscal aspects for the city of Pittsburgh. So welcome, hope everybody had a good lunch. And let me just quickly share the screen here. We have a presentation for you we want to provide. All right, there we go. So again, welcome. This will probably be the first of a couple of workshops that we'd like to present to you on the Emergency Solutions Grant Program and the Emergency Solutions Grant Coronavirus Program. So we'll just dive right in. My name is Whitney Finstrom. I'm Senior Manager of the Office of Community Development within the Office of Management and Budget. And with us today, we also have Kelly Russell, who's a Senior Planner with the Office of Management and Budget, and also Michael Knight, who's the Accounting Supervisor with the Office of Management and Budget Community Development. So the three of us will provide you with an overview. We're going to trade off our presentations depending on our strengths. And if you have any questions as we move along, please raise your hand and we'd be glad to provide answers to you. It looks like someone just raised their hand. I'm sorry, I missed that. We wanted to provide you with an overview, and the three of us will be presenting this afternoon. And I wanted to say welcome, of course, overall. And these are the topics we're going to cover this afternoon. And we also want to provide ample time for a Q&A session so that if you have questions, we'll try to provide you with answers to those questions. And what we'd like to do also is to compile those questions and responses and then provide those back out to you at a future date. It probably take us a couple days to pull that together. In addition, this webinar will also be available on our website. It's going to be posted by the city of Pittsburgh on YouTube, I believe, and then we'll have a link to it for those of you who may have staff members who are unable to attend today. They can watch this at a later time. What I'd like to do, first of all, is briefly go over the CARES Act, provide you with an overview related specifically to the ESG program, because the CARES Act is a broad bill, obviously focused on responding to the coronavirus. But this today is focused on the Emergency Solutions Grant coronavirus funds. We're going to get into compliance topics. We're going to provide you with an overview in terms of the process, in terms of deadlines and reports that are due. And we'll get into subrecipient responsibilities. We'll dive deep into invoicing and requisitions. That's kind of the main focus of this. This is focused on fiscal aspects. And then we'll have a Q&A session. If you want to raise your hand and ask questions, that's great. And then we'll provide you with contact information because you may have follow-up questions at the end of this. And we anticipate that, and we'll try to respond as quickly as we can. So to give you a really brief overview, for those of you who may not know this or haven't heard it in a long time, the CARES Act was signed back in March of 2020, shortly after the coronavirus was identified. And it's a huge bill, $2.2 trillion stimulus bill that was signed. Our portion of it, in terms of the Emergency Solutions Grant, totaled about $6.4 million. And that encompasses both a couple of the different rounds of ESG funding. There was an ESG CV1 released in April, and then a CV2 in September. So this is $6.4 million for both parts of that funding. The activities for this, specifically the coronavirus funds, are focused on activities to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus. That's the main focus of the funding, both not just for Emergency Solutions Grant funds, but for other federal funding as well, the CDBG funds and HOPA funds as well. And they can't be used for any other purpose. So the focus is to respond most immediately to the coronavirus. So focused in terms of on the Emergency Solutions Grant portion of it, as I said, it's to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus. And these are bullet points outlining the specifics related to the CARES Act and Emergency Solutions Grant funds. So it's designed for activities to prevent the initial or further spread of the virus. I'm just going to read it verbatim. To people experiencing homelessness, people at risk of homelessness, recipient or subrecipient staff, or other shelter or housing residents. And these include, for example, providing personal protection equipment to staff and program participants, paying for non-congregate shelter options such as hotels and motels, paying for hand washing stations and portable toilets for use by people living in unsheltered situations, and providing rapid rehousing or homelessness prevention assistance to individuals and families who are homeless or at risk of homelessness, as applicable, to reduce their risk of contracting or further spreading the virus. So as you can see by that, it's really meant to be, responding immediately to the crisis. So some of the compliance topics we're going to cover today include financial management, procurement and contracting, record keeping and monitoring. We'll get into duplication of benefits, try to define that for you, and we'll touch on some of the other federal requirements that exist with this federal funding. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Kelly Russell, who's working closely on the program.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. And I want to say thank you for taking the time to join us. Also, Whitney, and I wanted to let you and Alex know, Michael informed me we have some people over, unfortunately, on the Teams end of the call. I've just sent out that information. So in case anybody has any staff that might be out there who unfortunately went to the Teams part of the call, Michael Knight, who will be joining us soon, will be sending out a link to help get your fellow coworkers and colleagues onto the Zoom portion for the call. And we apologize for that inconvenience. Technology difficulties, I think that's something we're all accustomed to since March of 2020, but we shall move on. Some of you know, because I've been working with some of you a little bit closer than others, that there are expenditure deadlines on these funds. That all the funds must be expended by September 30th of 2022. The first deadline you want to keep in the back of your mind is the September 30th of 2021. If you have not expended 20% of your funds by then, HUD could potentially recapture those funds. The next expenditure deadline is March 31st of 2022. There's a potential that if you have not expended 80% of your funds, HUD could also recapture those funds as well. Next slide. Once again, as I mentioned, I've been working with some of these groups so far on reporting. This is always a fun thing when you accept government money. Unfortunately, you have to report on government money. There is a application called SAGE that I have to prepare these quarterly reports for. It's a two-pronged report. One part of the report involves your clients that your organization is serving or helping. The other part of the report includes finances. As such, I am working closely with Jessica McCown of the Department of Human Services, a name that a majority of the individuals on this call will probably know. If you don't know Jessica or don't know about the Department of Human Services, I know we have some newer subrecipients joining this call. Trust me, over the next year or so, you will get to know the Department of Human Services and Jessica McCown. But they'll be helping to prepare the reports of information that you enter into HMIS. If you're using HMIS, if you're a victim service provider, you'll have your own comparable database. But I will still need participant information on clients served, along with financial information in terms of operations, hazard pay. I know there's a few subrecipients on this call who are looking to do some shelter renovations. We can discuss that later. I'll be needing to get that information as those renovations take place and some other things. But the most important thing is these reports are always due at the end of every quarter. So granted, I know Whitney has these dates here because these are the dates I at least need to get the information from you by the 15th of January, the 15th of April, the 15th of July, and the 15th of October. because by the end of that month, I need to get this information submitted into the operation or into the database Sage, along with your report information, and get that to the government. We have a very good HUD rep who is on top of things, and we do not want to make her mad no matter what we do. So if you have not experienced this fiscal reporting yet, trust me, you will get to learn it soon. And don't be in a rush, because once you start reporting, it's let's just say, if you haven't experienced it yet, just take your time and be patient. You will report soon. But for those who are already reporting, I thank you for all your help and assistance. Next slide.
So I think most of you are probably work with the city, you work with the program before, work with BCD, and you know some of this information, but I do want to just cover it with you. As a subrecipient, in a sense, you carry equal responsibility with the city of Pittsburgh. You are receiving federal funding, so therefore it carries a number of responsibilities with it. And that's really the point of the first bullet point. So these funds and activities have to be carried out in a timely manner. You also have to track the progression of activities and evaluate performance, right? That's part of internal management. And then you have to establish effective management practices over the program for the ESG and ESGCV funded activities. And then it's federal funding, so you have to properly document activities, procedures, expenditures, and outcomes. Those are all critical because this is federal funding. We have to in turn report back to HUD and the federal government in terms of the accomplishments that have been done with this funding. And we have to maintain effective we want to maintain effective communication with you, with the city staff. So we're very interested in keeping in close contact with you, making sure that we're assisting you as much as we can in this process. So I'm also now going to turn over to Michael Knight. Welcome, Michael.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to now focus in on three key areas. Key word in there being the word key, that we are all going to need to make sure that we have a tight grip on, so that we can receive the Golden Key Award. The three areas that we're going to focus on is fiscal, or your financial management, your internal controls, and then your record retention process. Those are going to be three important areas that are going to play a role in making sure that you have a tight lock and a golden key on your systems. So just to kind of bring everything full circle, all this comes into play once a recipient receives an executed contract. Once the contract process is completed on our end, you will receive your contract, let you know that you can now be reimbursed for your funds. That's when we need to make sure that we have these three key areas in place or already in place. If there's any questions as to what type of guidelines you need to follow, which the city has to follow, and since you're a subrecipient of the city, it will be the 2 CFR 200. That's the HUD regulations that we follow, and we expect our awardees to follow. So we go to the next slide. We're going to talk a little bit more in depth to these three key areas. So we're going to start about 10 o'clock on this slide with the cash management reimbursement method. This right here is whenever your executed contract is in hand, there's a term date on it, a start and an end date. Whatever expenses you've incurred, bills or whatever, you need to make sure you keep those records, because those are going to be the documents that you'll need to submit to our department for reimbursement. So depending on what your organization is doing, what realm, we do need to see copies of the invoices, bills, and etc. It's a long laundry list, but we can always go into depth individually with each organization. So it's going to be very important to make sure that you keep those documents in order. Next will be your internal controls. Not a whole lot. I would hope a lot of you already have like written processes and procedures in place to make sure that there's no conflict of interest, there's separation of duties. just some, you're going to need these documents just in case HUD was to monitor you, or if the city as ourselves comes to monitor you, it's going to be necessary to have those. So if you have them already, it'd be nice to make like an additional copy to put into this contract, go along with this contract that you have, just so you don't have to go looking for the internal controls that are necessary to have on file with dealing with our funding. Next is accounting records. So when we talk about accounting records, you want to make sure that this CARES money has its own job number, account code, ledger book, its own separate accounting system that we can look at and see the money being received, the expenses that you charged against the funds, and then last but not least, the reimbursement coming back in. We don't want to have to shuffle through the principal account or other subsidiary accounts that these funds could be tied into. We want to have something that's just clean and directly focused on the CV program or ESG program. So it's going to be very important that you have an independent accounting record or system, not so much a system, but again, account code for these funds. Next, allowable costs. So when dealing with HUD money, there's stipulations and certain things that are allowable, and there are things that are not allowable. Again, if you have any questions regarding that, you can always reach out to your planner, or you can always look to that 2 CFR 200, which was referenced on the last slide, which can give you more details on allowable costs and eligible costs. But after you have those 4 hubs in order, last but not least is just keeping everything in a sound area. So if you're paper oriented, if you can have like a binder where you have your contract, your expenses, the copy of the check that you received back, also any policy and procedures, if you could have that all in a binder, that way if when monitor we ever had to come see it, all you had to do is pull this one binder out that has the complete source of documentation that you would need to support this contract. Again, we want to make it easier on you so you don't have to panic, worry whenever you get that call or a letter saying, we're coming out to monitor you, or if HUD just wants to do a routine follow-up and say, hey, you want to come see about this funding that you received, everything's in place and you're already set up to win. Not only are you set up to win, but you've also been set up to have the golden key because you have everything in order, nice fine lock on it, and you're good. You reached the gold key standard. So, again, any questions on this, don't hesitate to ask your planners, ourselves. We'll have a moment at the end of this presentation to go over some questions that you may be thinking of, but we're going to continue on with the presentation. So in the next slide, we're going to talk about some of the type of expenses that a lot of organizations like to be reimbursed for, personnel being one of those line items. So whenever dealing with personnel, these are, employees, timesheets, there's three key areas that we need to make sure that we have. First and foremost is a timesheet. The timesheet must represent the days that the timesheet runs from, January 1st to January 15th, or every 2 weeks, something of that nature. We need to see the individual days, in and out, total number of hours worked that day. And if the employee is not 100% being reimbursed for the ESG program, then we would need to see an ESG column at the end of each day work that identifies the number of hours that employee worked. So if the employee worked a total of 8 hours on Monday, January 5th, but out of those 8 hours, 3 hours were on the ESG CV program, we would just need to see the 3 hours at the end and so forth for every day of that timesheet work and so forth. Next, to go along with the timesheet. Well, let me pause. One thing to consider. Also with the timesheet, we need to see signatures, the employee signature and a supervisor signature. Again, I know in the beginning of the COVID stage, a lot of us were working from home, so it might have been a little bit difficulty to get both signatures physically on the document, but if you can do it, great. If not, we will at least need to see the employee signature. And then if there's a email that you want to submit from the supervisor, giving your stamp of approval, that can work too. I mean, you know, we're understanding of that, but we do need to make sure we account for those two signatures. So again, with the timesheets, we need to make sure that we get a copy of a pay stub, payroll summary, payroll report, different variations of names for this to show proof that this employee was paid for their time work. And, we want to make sure that, the hours times the rate all ties into how much you're asking to be reimbursed for this individual or individuals, depending on the number of employees that you're submitting payroll for. Again, if you're asking for some fringe benefits like Medicare, disability, retirement, you would need to also provide the proper documentation showing. So for healthcare, we would need to see the healthcare bill with that individual employee listed on there, how much, they pay, and, or not so much how much they pay, how much the employee pays for that individual, and then so forth. We would need to see that documentation in order to reimburse for those costs. If you just say you want to be reimbursed for healthcare and you don't have that documentation, we will not be able to reimburse you for those funds. And again, we only reimburse healthcare, retirement, those things within the months that we paid for that employee's time work. So if the employee worked in August and you submitted healthcare costs for June and July, and we've never paid for that employee's time for June or July, we cannot reimburse for that time worked. So if he worked in August, we can reimburse for August healthcare costs. Okay. Another expense is, housing, shelter, some type of assistance that the programs that we contract with do. It's very important that when submitting for these costs that we get a copy of, not each and every time, but per client. The first time you invoice for a client's housing support, we need to get a copy of the lease or rental agreement that you are paying for so that we can keep track of client A, what we paid the arrears for, June, July, August, based off of this agreement. That way we're not making any duplicate reimbursements just in case something gets lost in the system. So we need a copy of the lease agreement just on the first go around, so we know what the time frame of this employee or this client's reimbursements are good for. A copy of the check showing that a check was cut to the landlord or the owner of the estate for whatever rental payments. And then another thing is utility expenses. We do need to see a copy of the utility bill as to who that bill was being paid for, what client. We just don't want to have utility bills for clients that we don't know fall underneath of the city's ESG allocation. So, again, questions, feel free to ask. If you're not sure about something, we're here to help you out. But, personnel and housing are two, housing and utility expenses are two major expenses that we do see a lot with these programs. So just to kind of bring everything full circle, we talked about what three key areas that you needed to have in place in order to make sure that you're meeting not only the city's requirements, but HUD's requirements. We talked about the type of expenses that we're used to seeing. Now, last but not least is how do we get reimbursed for these expenses that we see. So there's a requisition form that I'm going to talk about in a second that we would need to have submitted each and every time you invoice or invoice for reimbursement. So if we look at the next slide, this is a copy of a requisition form. Some people on this call may be very familiar with this. We do have some new groups on here. So I'm just going to go over some of the key areas of this form, even though everything on here is a key area, but you'll receive this form one of two ways. Old way was a paper form with your executed contract, but due to the new lifestyle that we're living, you'll receive this form in a digital version, which they both work the same way. First things first, when you get this, we need to make sure that you put your name and address of the agency up there. That way we know who's submitting these documents and we know who to properly reimburse. Second is in the upper right-hand corner, we need to make sure that you put the contract number, and the term of your contract on there. That way, you know, we can, even though we have access to your contract, the contract number helps us bring all that together to make sure that you are billing for the correct contractor, or some groups that have multiple contracts. So, you know, not going to go too in depth to that. So in the top middle of the screen where it says requisition number, your first requisition will be number 1. So, you know, make sure you put a number 1 there, not a number 3 or a letter A, just a number 1, nice and simple. And then the requisition period. What this means is, say if you're invoicing for a quarter of the months served, so March through June, or March through May, you'll just put on here requisition period from March 2020 through May of 2020, just so, you know, not so much for us, but for you all, you know, what the time frame of the documents that you submitted fell within. And then the last part on the requisition date, that's the date that you would be submitting the requisition to the city to review for reimbursement. Okay. So we're just going to slide down a little bit. We're going to start to the left again with the cost category. The cost category represents the budget name that you have in your contract. So if you're doing shelter, you're going to have shelter in there. If you have HMIS, like, you know, HMIS, but whatever your contract set up for, the budget name will fall in that cost category. If you have more than one, you'll have more than one cost category to fill in. Next is the budget. However much your contract for that line item is how much needs to go into the budgeted amount. Now, once we have those two categories filled in, I'm going to relate this to the digital form. So in the digital form, if we go to the expense of the month, which is the far right hand side of this form, what you'll do is, if you're asking to be reimbursed for $20,000 in shelter costs for the time frame that you're billing for, you need to make sure that you put $20,000 in that that box. And for shelter, that way we know that you're asking for $20,000 in reimbursement. Now, if you put $20,000 in there, now you need to make sure that the backup equals $20,000 worth of reimbursement or more than the amount. If you submit a reimbursement for $20,000 but only give us $10,000 in backup, you're only going to get $10,000 reimbursed unless you can submit the difference within a timely fashion. So whenever you put that back to expense of the month, once you put that amount into that column, it will automatically populate into the year-to-date expense as $20,000, and then the amount remaining will be the difference of your budget and year-to-date, which you will have to spend moving forward if you haven't expended all your funds in the first requisition, which we do have a lot of groups that do one requisition to spend all their money. If not, it's okay. You know, just make sure that you're, you know, sending and submitting requisitions on, if not a monthly basis, at least a quarterly basis. So that's takes care of the top part as far as figuring out how to fill out this requisition. One last thing that we would need to see on this requisition is at the bottom right-hand corner, and that's just a signature from someone in the organization who has authorization to sign these forms. That way we know that when we receive it, we're good to process and get you all paid back your money for the great work that you're doing. So again, with this requisition form, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to reach out to your planner, ourselves. We'll walk you through it. You know, it's never your jobs to panic, feel like you have to, you know, make it harder than it has to be. Our jobs to make it very simple for you, for us, for everyone. So that concludes the fiscal part. You know, now we're going to get ready to open this thing up for any questions that you may have for the group. I'm going to turn it back over to Whitney now. Thank you all for your time.
Thanks, Michael, for that overview. That's great. As Michael said, the key is that we're here to assist you to make your process easier and simpler. And having said that, we fully understand how complicated some of the stuff can be. Believe me, we know. But we want to be a partner with you to make this process as smooth and seamless as possible. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, I apologize for anyone who came in later, but we started by saying that this is really going to be one of a couple of webinars that we're going to be holding over the next month to 2 months. So this is not the end all and be all. It's just really the start. This one's focused primarily on the city's fiscal aspects, you know, in terms of billing and requisitions and the process. We do anticipate having a joint webinar. We're not quite sure when, but with ACD, we think probably in February. But so this is just one of a couple of sessions we plan on having. We also are talking about doing a regular, possibly a couple times a month, having an open Teams meeting, possibly, you know, where we'd have office hours from 1 to 3 p.m., let's say. So if you have any questions, we will be online and available to you to respond to your questions. So at this point, if anyone has any questions, I think the process at this point is if you raise your hand, I believe it's the little yellow symbol, and ask that question. I think Alex will have 2 raised hands, and we'll try to answer those. As I think I also mentioned at the beginning, we are going to compile the questions and responses and send them back out to everyone. We also will, at the end of this, provide our email addresses, names, email addresses, contact information, and we'll be available via email to respond to those questions. You know, if after this you say, hey, gosh, I wish I'd asked this question, it's not too late. Plus, this presentation will be available on our website. We'll be on YouTube, and we'll send you a link to that. So, sorry. So, a couple people raised their hands.
This is Christine Kirby from Neighborhood Legal Services. So along with the links, will you send kind of a handout of the PowerPoint so that we can share with our various staff members working on this?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd be glad to do that.
And also having a copy of the HUD CFR 200 regulations would be really ideal.
Okay.
I had a couple questions regarding timesheets. We've transitioned to electronic signatures on timesheets. Is that acceptable to the city?
Yes, electronic signatures are acceptable. Is there any like section on there where it has like an approved by?
Yeah, I mean, when they certify and then our staff the supervisors accept it, acknowledge the.
Okay, that's good. I mean, again, if you want to just send a copy of that over to us just to see, you know, that'd be good. But to answer your question, yes, we do accept electronic versions.
And then I had so we're a legal services provider very similar to a victim service provider. So we have a comparable service case management system. But one of the things that I was kind of curious on is what the city defines as their definition of near homeless. Over the years, we've come into contact where clients are facing eviction, and maybe not have been eligible for any sort of rental assistance money if we file an appeal. One, primarily if there's some of their due process rights were violated, or, sometimes it's been non-payment of rent and other issues. And what we found is in the olden days, sometimes folks, once we filed that appeal, there was a definition that folks were no longer near homeless because that appeal may have bought them 10 days. I was just wondering if the city if they have adopted a formal definition of near homelessness.
I can start off by saying, if Kelly wants to speak to this also, that that's actually one of the policy kind of areas that we're talking with ACD about that. Actually, we talked about that exact issue in terms of the definition of near homeless, right? And all the parameters around that, because I know that can trigger certain negative benefits that they qualify for, not qualify for. So I don't believe we have a, we have a definition, but that definition is kind of is evolving right now. Would you say that's the case, Kelly, or am I off base?
No, you kind of took the words out of my mouth. And to go along with Whitney's point, Christine, we're working, and when I say we, I mean the city and ACED. We're working to see if we can somewhat make that definition a little bit easier. Mm-hmm. We ironically just had a meeting with ACED yesterday, and that discussion started. So to answer your question directly, we don't have a direct answer right now. However, we're working on something together, because we do want to get some other programs started within the next month or so. So I can't answer your, okay. Something, let me shut up. I'll shut up. You talk.
Oh, that's fine. I can say a lot of our housing attorneys at Neighborhood Legal Services are very skilled in knowing what works and what doesn't work for the client benefit. We're unable to advise on public policy unless you ask us, but some of our sister programs like the Community Justice Project and Regional Housing Legal Services and a few others do not have any prohibitions on public policy advocacy, and can tell, and we've been working a lot on these different things. So if you would like some legal input, I can help you make those connections.
Yeah, that is greatly appreciated. Thank you. I want to say thank you again, because you've given us some other offline conversations, some stuff to think about. So that's why I'm saying thank you again.
Thanks, Christine. We're definitely open to that. We are not closed at all to, we want to make sure we make well-informed decisions. So.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And just to make it clear about for Christine, so I'll send out the PowerPoint presentation and the 2 CFR 200 to everyone. The 2 CFR 200 is fairly large. I might end up sending you a link. Michael said it's a fairly large PDF, but I don't want to damage anybody's inboxes. But I'll send a link.
And I have one final thing, and then I'll let somebody else take the mic. It would be really helpful, because we're all working in this sort of eviction prevention, homelessness prevention, housing stabilization ecosystem. It would be really cool to know who else is receiving some of this funding and what they're doing, so that our staffs are kind of fully educated in sort of this emerging, or CARES COVID related. Finally, housing's getting a little bit more resources that we need. Unfortunately, demand is probably at an all-time high. So.
Yeah, we appreciate that, because a couple of us have been on the eviction calls, and there's so much going on, right? And so many people working really hard to address the issue. And if we can help to be a part of that ecosystem, as you said, that's important. I think you're right about, other people knowing what are the resources that are out there and who else is addressing which part of the issue, right? Versus being in, maybe use the old term silos, but, trying to move away from the silos. So I think that's a great idea. And, maybe that means like in 2-3 weeks, we do another session like this where we have almost like and nobody has, time for a big round table, but some kind of technical assistance or something. I don't know, we have to think about it, but thanks for that. I think there was another question. Somebody else had raised their hand.
Family links and Heidi. Family links. You want to go?
We're good. Just listening. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, yes, this is Heidi Gibson from Goodwill, Southwestern PA. My question is, you were talking about the support documentation that is needed. Now, is that supposed to be submitted with every invoice, or is that just something that we need to make sure we keep on file in case we're audited?
So I'll answer this question. So that's information that you need to have on file in case of audit. As far as submitting of your invoices, again, I'll just use personnel as an example. For personnel, yes, we'll need, the timesheets, the payroll, register, summary, pay stub, something of that nature, to be submitted every time in that instance. Now, with housing, again, if there was a employee or there was a client that had arrears and you paid, we'll say the first 3 months of their arrears, January through March, we would need to see the contract for that rental agreement for that client, which might have went from November of 19 through November of 2020, but you paid January through March's 2020 arrears, and then on one requisition, and then came back another requisition later and paid arrears for June through August. We wouldn't need the copy of that lease agreement again if it's for the same property, because we already had it the one time. So, we just try to prevent constant duplication of submitting, information like that. Now, every time there's a new client and new arrears being paid, yes, we do need to see the documentation for our first time client. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Yep, not a problem. Thank you for the question. Great question. Any other questions out here? Again, no question's a dumb question. A question that you may be thinking, someone else might be thinking too. Raymond, go, you got the floor.
Hi, this is Ray Slepsky. I'm from the Salvation Army. You said that there's reporting due on January 15th. What reporting is that? Just a requisition and with the documentation, or is there something else?
I got this one, Mike. No, Ray, that's that quarterly report in Sage. That's the way I've already sent you the email requesting the information like we did last quarter around operations. You sent me some things in regards to the cleaning expenses. I want to say off the top of my head.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's what that is again, Ray. So,
okay, thank you, Kelly.
No problem. And also, speaking of reporting and monitoring and things like that, I just want to say this too, and I think Whitney will agree with me. Our local HUD offices, our local HUD office has let us know that with these funds, as scary as the letters IRS are to us on the personal level, I would like to introduce everybody to the letters OIG. And what that stands for is the Office of Inspector General. And they are the organization that monitors the government. So as I mentioned before, our local HUD office has let us know with the amount of CV funds that have went out across the country, we can expect a potential visit from the OIG. And I don't say that to scare anybody or be like, oh no, the OIG is coming, it's the end of the world. We just want you to continue with processes you have in place. Make sure you document, Document. I cannot stress how important documenting things are. If you have questions about certain things that you're concerned about, put things in writing and email and track it back to us, and that way we can let you know. But I just want to stress the importance of documentation, especially for the shelters who are doing renovations. I know it seems like you feel like we might be making you jump through hoops, but there's a reason we are making you jump through hoops, because at the end of the day, nobody wants to give money back to the government. I'm getting off my soapbox, and if anybody has questions, I just wanted to say that in one of my earlier points, Whitney.
No, thanks, Kelly. You're correct. I mean, the message is that there's going to be a lot of oversight of this funding by OIG. But that's not to, as Kelly also very well put it, to people should do the great work that they're doing out there. Just the key is communicate with us. Let's keep in communication. If you have questions, ask us. And we'll continue to have these training sessions and webinars. So, as soon as we learn anything new, because there's constant new information coming out about the ESG and CARES Act and so on. Seems like, well, not so much on a daily basis right now, but fairly often. So, if there are updates, clarifications, and whatnot, we'll be sure to communicate those to you. If there aren't any other questions, again, this isn't, it's not like if you don't ask a question now, you'll never be able to ask another one. We're available by email. Obviously, we're all working from home. We're not in the office yet. We don't know when that's going to happen, but so, you can certainly email us. And I wanted to provide you with our contact information. Most of this information you saw at the beginning, right? I'm Whitney, Kelly. There's also Pam Underwood, who's a fiscal and contracting supervisor in the budget office, can also respond and answer questions you may have, as well as Michael, who's on with us today. Thanks, Michael. So yeah, here are our email addresses, and as was requested, and we'll send this PowerPoint presentation out to everyone, and it'll be available also as a link on YouTube if you wish to go that route, or you can look at the PowerPoint. And just more directly, if you have ESG specific questions, you can go right to Kelly. Here's Kelly's email address. I know many of you have already been working with Kelly for a long time. And I just wanted to make a note to emphasize the fact that this is really the first in a series of webinars to assist your organization. And we do anticipate in the future having webinars in partnership with ACD, because we'll have webinars around policy issues that have been brought up, right, in terms of definitions and near homelessness. And there's just a large array of policy issues and questions that we're trying to address to be more quickly responsive to the coronavirus, as well as just homelessness in general, but also certainly addressing the immediate economic challenges that people are facing. So that's critical. So yeah, this is just one of a couple we'll have in the future, hopefully fairly soon. Just wanted to make that clear to everyone. So we do appreciate your time this afternoon. We want to thank you. And of course, thanks to Michael and Kelly for presenting and everyone who's assisted. And we do appreciate your questions. And we will, I took notes. I'll try to put these in the note format, send it out to everyone, so that these might be questions that other people have as well. They want to see the answers. So we'll send that back out to everyone. So if there are no other questions, we do appreciate your time this afternoon. Hope you have a great Monday. Stay warm, stay safe, and thank you for attending today.